Welcome to the Authentic Living and Loving channel, where we feature stories about individuals that are living to the beat of their own drum, doing things a little bit out of the ordinary, most importantly, living authentically and inspiring others to do the same. My name is Dr. Julian Alexander, and today we are so fortunate to have Simon Hertnon with us. Good day, Simon.
Hi there.
Simon, what have you done to your face?
Well, the authentic me, the authentic 50-year-old me, had some sun damage, and it's being treated and fixed, and then it'll go away, and I'll have fresh new skin.
Oh,
So
fantastic. Good. See, this
nothing more sinister.
this is one of these. Simon's joining us from Auckland, and Auckland doesn't get as much sun as Wellington.
That's true, actually.
Now, Simon, you're an author, you're a lecturer, you're a father, and according to Simone, a great husband. You've been teaching business writing at Victoria University here in town in Wellington, helping others become effective with clear, concise, compelling writing skills. You've written several nonfiction books and recently launched your fiction career with the captivating love story, which was phenomenal. I loved it. The Julian Calendar. And the byline, 1 year, 2 voices, the infinite possibilities of love. Just incredible. And we'll hear a little bit more from Simon about the book. You've also taken the publishing world on by storm. We'll hear about your distribution company, Naked Eyes, and your philosophy on self-publishing. You're calling in from Auckland. Thank you so much. And I'm just so thrilled to have you on the show today. And I know others are going to want to hear all about your writing, your journey, Julian, and maybe even get some tips for their own writing. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks, Jordan.
So maybe we could start in the beginning. I'd love to sort of hear a little bit about what was the younger Simon like, and maybe you could share a little bit about your life growing up, any lessons from overseas and factors that influenced your career.
Sure, thanks. I had an unusual childhood because even though I was born in New Zealand, in a little town called Tauranga, a couple of hours south of here, I actually spent most of my childhood in the UK. I started school there. And, I grew up on National Geographics and then actually traveling. And my dad is a doctor and my mother was a phys ed teacher. So there was a lot of, logic, a lot of travel, just a really explorative kind of childhood where I got to see the world with my own 2 eyes. I think by the time I returned to New Zealand, when I was about 7.5, I'd already been to 13 countries. So, I had a first-hand view of what people are all about and how we're really all the same. I discovered that a smile is the same anywhere in the world. People tend to laugh at the same things. And I think that upbringing of travel really set my path, because I think I was always going to be a philosopher of some kind. And I saw the variance and the similarities in the world. And I think from that point forward, I wanted to try to nut out what we're all about. And then that's what I've done.
Fantastic. So would you say, I mean, that's an amazing, rich sort of starting point. Did you always want to get into be a university lecturer or writing? How did that sort of come about?
Okay, so, growing up here, most kids want to be an All Black and all of that sort of thing. And I played rugby, and I was pretty good at rugby and volleyball, but my great love was reading. And so I did want to be a writer. I wanted to be Will Smith. And in fact, when I was 16, 17, I ended up going to South Africa for a whole year as a Rotary exchange student. And I chose South Africa because of Will Smith, because of an author, and I'd fallen in love with the country and the kind of magical stories. Writing, there was a small hiccup in that I was useless at writing. It was my worst subject because I didn't understand the mechanics of it. English here tends to be literature, not language, and I'm very logical, so it was never explained. So my passion was for writing. My skills didn't match that. So really all I ended up doing was, after I had been to South Africa on the Rotary Exchange, I came back and I ended up studying linguistics at university, not because I thought that would lead me to writing, but really because I thought it would lead me to learning other people's languages so that I could just continue to travel and maybe pick up their languages faster, and then that would enable me to learn more about them. Of course, what happened was I learned the basics of English and I suddenly could write, and never stopped writing from that point forward.
Fantastic. So did you, so you had this love of language, love of people, love of words. And now would you say you're currently living your passion? Are you doing what you absolutely love?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very easy to not follow those passions because of, the necessities of life. I'm married, I have 2 children, and that's probably the biggest challenge, as an adult, to be responsible but also follow your passions, if your passions happen to be something where there's no commercial pathway. And so I have said one word more than any other in my life, which is no. No to the things that might take me off track from the things that I really want to do, which I've always obviously said yes to. I don't lack courage. I think I'm logical enough to know that when you do the things that take up your time, that don't help you, that lead you astray, that by leaving you in a comfortable place, but not the place that you care about, that you end up chewing up all that time. So I've only ever been employed on a full-time job for 27 months of my life, and that all occurred before my daughters were born. That was part of the courtship, to prove to my wife that I could hold down a real job. But the rest of my life I've lived as a consultant and as a teacher and as a writer, and just being able to say yes and no to individual projects and follow my passion and learn and teach. And so not easy, but I am following my passions, and my books and my teaching certainly are now sharing whatever I've learned with others, and I'm very proud of that, so it's good.
That's great. So before we get into your writing fiction, which is kind of one of your goals after having all the nonfiction books, I just want to just tease out a little bit. So you've sort of gone to the beat of your own drum, but along the way there must have been people that said, Simon, you're crazy, you shouldn't be doing that, or get a real job, or how did you cope with those sort of naysayers as you're going through your life? Because you have very much broken the mold. Literally every time you step out the door, you're doing something again that's quite different.
Well, look, I started on the fiction path, which is my deep love. I'm a philosopher, and philosophers need to tell stories. I really believe that's important. And the non-fiction path is how it's played out, but it's the storytelling that I always wanted to do. So I started out having a go at that. And the first draft, as I think the first draft of the Julian Calendar, which was originally titled In All the Ways I Can, was finished 25 years ago. And I was a young man, and I got an agent. I was in London, and at that point we put it out there to go down that path, and it didn't work because it wasn't good enough, and it was right that it didn't work. And then I came back to New Zealand, and there wasn't really an option to do it, and I didn't want to just give it away, and I didn't want to half do it, and I knew it still needed more work. I ended up coming back and doing a screenwriting course, which, if anybody who's listening loves storytelling, I highly recommend learning about screenwriting. And there's a book called Story, the McKee book, Robert McKee. Absolutely fantastic book to help you understand the basics of storytelling. There's only kind of 7 stories. You may have heard that before. It's true, and once you know that, you can work from that. So I couldn't follow my fiction path. It nearly happened, and there was an opportunity in New Zealand, but something came up. Someone died that was involved in the publishing company, and so the project got put to one side. And at that point, I just needed to get a real job. But I don't know that I've had people telling me what not to do. It's more that I should have, my wife obviously being someone who cares very much about me just staying afloat, keeping us afloat as a family. So I've had to just chop and change to keep things going. And again, for people who want to write stories, yes, you need to publish at some point because that completes the piece of art. But whilst you're waiting for the right opportunity, keep writing. So I haven't stopped. I didn't stop writing my fiction. I just kept chipping away in the background. And now I will catch up. I really believe that. I believe that in the next 10 years, I'll publish as much as I would have in the last 20. I'll just publish more frequently. There'll be better quality books. I'll catch up. It's just doing the right things at the right time. So yeah, I haven't had my whole family, my wife, my kids, but my wider family have all gone along with the fact that this is just who I am. I don't do anything like anybody else. There is no model that I'm following. I'm a philosopher. There's no place for that. So I've had jobs that enable me to practice my philosophy through business writing, teaching people to do business writing, and then now as a novelist, which feels very good.
Well, it's almost that feel good factor that helps you to know you're on the right path. You are doing, what you were put here to do. It's that congruency, and I guess with the Julian Calendar, if we can just sort of segue into that your first novel, just by means of an overview. It's the story of a bright young photojournalist who returns to London with the aim of releasing himself from a profound love affair that has stalled without explanation. Instead, he's derailed by memories of the secretive nurse who broke his heart, and rejuvenated by a retired publisher, Julian, who is erudite, excellent company, and gay. So begins an unexpected and intense friendship that challenges the fundamental notion of love itself. Now, I think, Simon, it's such an interesting story. And I think as you go through it, as time goes on, and I think this, people have said this before to you, there'll be something that grabs you and go, oh yeah, gosh, that is so complicated, or I can understand now why it was seen from this way or that way. And so it's one of those things that sticks to you, which I think any good story does do. In Capital Magazine, where you were featured a couple of months ago with the launch of the Julian Calendar novel, you said you're really putting yourself out there, and it was a public declaration of Simon the Creative. Can you explain what you meant about that?
Yeah, well, I said at the top of this, I'm 50 years old, so that means I've been out there in the marketplace, not as a novelist, for a long, long time. And New Zealand is a very small country, and I know a lot of people, and they know me as a consultant, as a productivity or a writing consultant, and I couldn't have taken a bigger departure by writing not just a novel, but the most personal kind of novel that you can write, because this one is autobiographically based. Not more than that, it's about a character's deepest feelings, frailties, naivety, and a person at their kind of, when they're broken, at their lowest. And this is a novel that really the characters wear their hearts on their sleeves, and so to suddenly come out with a book that raw, where basically people use that phrase to sort of a window into your soul. Well, all I have to do to achieve that is to give them that novel, and they can look right on inside and see what makes my heart beat. And that's a fairly major kind of declaration and it's public, and I'm publicizing it. So, if I was uncomfortable about it in any way, it wouldn't have happened. I am completely at peace with that. A very good editor friend of mine asked me about that and said, "Hey, look, are you comfortable with this?" And I said, "Yes, I am, because this is what storytelling is about. You go to the most complicated and raw place." I love that rawness about this story, and I love other stories. I'm reading Less at the moment by Andrew Sear Green. It's a very raw story, and I find that really engaging, where there isn't much between you and the raw emotions. So yeah, that's what I've done, and I think that the way that the novel has been received by people of all ages and all backgrounds. I've had a 90-year-old woman, tell me how much she loved it, and really people from every background, because the book grabs you by the heart and it makes you laugh and cry. And yeah, it's about 23-year-old Simon, who in the novel is Daniel. And it's about the man I met as a 23-year-old who changed my life, whose real name is John Henry Garmansway, bless him. And in the novel, he is Julian, of the Julian Calendar. And the novel is called that because it takes place over precisely 1 year. And if I can segue to some advice, creative advice to people, when you want to be really creative, it is fantastic to put some kind of constraints around things. So a novel that takes place over precisely 1 year, what can you cover in that frame? And then the year, it's broken down into the 4 seasons. What can you cover in each of those seasons? If you're trying to write a piece of music and you pick 3 notes and 1 instrument, you can suddenly be creative. But if you just say, write me a piece of music, it's overwhelming, it's too much. So if you want to unleash your creativity, setting constraints, making some of those calls about what you're not going to do enables you to focus your energy on what you are going to do.
No,
So
that's great advice. I mean, it's that how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, but you try and look at it, and it is overwhelming. So thank you. That's really great.
yeah, and I think the creativity of this story was unleashed because of all of the technical elements that I employed in the background in designing the story. So for those who haven't read it, it is written in 2 voices, which is pretty unusual when the 2 voices are first person in alternate chapters. And the beautiful, beautiful thing was that my dear friend, John Garmansway, aged about 64 at the time, having never written in his life, committed to me to writing this novel with me. And so he wrote the first draft. And for him, it was, I think, enormously cathartic, because he wrote things down that he has never said to people ever since then, and he's never written down again. And it made sense of his own life, I think, for him. And then I wrote first, designed the novel, and then wrote first, and then handed it over to John and said, hey, look, this is what I need you to cover. And it was a beautiful process, just doing that together. And then, yeah, since then I've obviously tweaked it, and hopefully at no point taken that deep, authentic voice of his away. And I believe I achieved that now that I have had it read by so many people who knew him, and feel when they pick up the book, it's like sitting there with John and having a chat with him.
It's interesting, Simon. You're saying a little bit about you're putting yourself out there, and indeed John was putting himself out there as well, and it is a real brave thing to do, to show your vulnerabilities. But I do think it's quite important as well that you're showing, by being vulnerable yourself, you're encouraging others to have conversations. I mean, growing up when John did, would have been, guys in New Zealand for sure were never, I mean, even now it's a challenge for men to talk about their feelings. Now you've gone and again blown that out of the water, and are totally exposed. But also, I mean, it's so important how many people will be able to relate to, gosh, I've thought that before, or I've felt that before, and you've put some words to that. I mean, it's such an important topic, and you coming out as a creative and novelist, and John coming out now he was 89 years old when the book finally hit the stands, if you will. Can you tell us a little bit about just a little window into that dynamic, and when you sort of showed him the end results of 25 plus years of work?
Okay, well, there's a few things there. I'm really proud of this very intimate, not very traditional novel because of that unique structure, but the intimacy where, yeah, I'm a guy, a Kiwi guy, showing that sensitivity, and there are very few books in the world that have a 63-year-old gay hero. And the Julian Calendar has that, and so his is a voice we haven't heard before. I think the Daniel character's young, naive, romantic, not quite so rare, but the Julian voice is really beautiful, and the sensitivity and the frailty that shines through. So John wrote about being gay, which he didn't talk about. And so that, to start with, was a big deal. And then he purposefully chose to show all of his frailties in that character. Now, when you read this story, what shines through is that this man was an extraordinarily loyal and just the best friend you could hope for. But in the story, he focuses on his frailty. He felt that he was a fickle lover, and so he was doubling down on showing his frailties. And I think that was something that has ended up making the book even more touching to people, that they see this person opening up, and then, well, both characters are showing the light of their their weakest parts of their personalities, the bits that they needed each other to help grow back. And I doubt that any two people in the world would have thought that someone who fitted the other profile would be the person who would make them whole. But that's how it worked out. My 23-year-old, very heterosexual character who was looking for the princess and had found her, and then she had vanished, which happens a lot. I think it's important to note that as our world becomes one of lots of international travel, this sort of situation is going to happen more and more, where people meet someone in another country, they fall in love, and then they're separated geographically. And so they are not able to see the course of their relationship continue. It just stops, and then there's a separation. So you don't get to find out that it wasn't going to work out. You're just left hanging, and you assume that it would have worked out, as romantically you would, and so you want to go back to it, but it would have faded away. And so that's my character coming in. He's lost. And then John's character, Julian, is a 63-year-old gay person for whom romantic love hasn't worked out for him. And then this young, in his eyes, good-looking chap turns up who's sensitive and male, and it all looks good. But of course, Daniel isn't gay, and that creates great complications for this man. And it did for John. And so he has to work that through. And so, this is a book about all of the kinds of love that there are: gay, straight, platonic, romantic, starstruck, and so on. And they're all in play at various times. And we just work through them as characters, and you can come along for the ride. And one thing I'd like to say about the book is it's designed with very short chapters, and that enables a reader to move along and to see these two perspectives. So it's a pretty pacey read for a sensitive story, and that's how we did it.
So, Sonia, you cover you both reveal you know, so much about yourselves, and that interplay then brings up some core issues, things like you've said, you know, about love and friendship. One of the things around sexuality and identity is one that I'm particularly interested in, only because there are so many preconceived notions, stereotypes. You know, there's the generations today are so different from what we had when we were growing up, and for fear of sounding like my mother, so different from, you know, how she was. Maybe you could just touch just a little bit on that, the challenges, I guess, about identity and that sexuality, just to help with some of the readers that might be also struggling with some of those aspects.
Sure, really good topic. So I have twin 17-year-old daughters for whom sexual identity is just this fluid thing like the sun rising every day. And that is not what I grew up with. And, you know, so John's another whole generation, you know, earlier. So for him, sexuality was just something you didn't talk about. And that's really sad because his own family members didn't talk about his own sexuality with him their entire lives, and that never occurred. I feel almost ashamed with how little I understood about sexuality as a young person. I realize now that there were gay people and you know, in my world, in my orbit, that I just didn't recognize because the topic just never came up. So I'm really pleased that I met John and that I just fell in love with this man and then discovered that he was gay and then just realized that it just didn't matter, but that sexuality for him was a huge defining factor of his life. And I hope in the future it isn't like that, that his love for other people is just his human characteristic, which is what played out. But that wasn't front and center for him. It was complicated. And I hope that it isn't like that in the future. And it's a wonderful thing to have written a book that engages this kind of conversation. I'm really pleased that his family is really, really behind him coming out in this novel. So for the listeners, my friend John was 89. He died after he got the first advanced review copy of the book, so he knew it was finished, but he was 10 days short of 90. And anyway, but in publishing the novel, he has come out posthumously, which he knew was going to happen and was comfortable with. And he would have come out 25 years earlier if we'd published it then. But he had no intention of coming out for any other reason. It was if he was going to come out for this story, for this love story, where his sexuality was a side part of that, then that was okay. But for him to just come out and for, you know, to explain something that he didn't feel needed explaining, that wasn't going to happen. And I understand that based on his upbringing. However, in the future, I hope that no one needs to come out. It's just, you know, your sexuality is just something that is open and discussed as part of life. So it's not coming out, it's just being. And you know, I think we've got a long, long way to go. And we've got to be mindful that even though the younger generations are cool with all of this stuff, that doesn't change the fact that most of the population is not, you know, able to just be open and free about that. So we've got a lot of work to do.
We do, Simon. And I think that in some ways, although it's a love story, it's also almost a history book. If you take that lens of how have our thoughts and feelings changed, because you are really it's an intergenerational thing. And that's why it's interesting that you mentioned about your teenage girls. Mine are the same. You know, they go, my youngest recently changed high schools this year. She's a senior. And when we were doing the interview, the dean was saying, you know, what you need to understand about coming here is that we are all, you know, we're all in this together, and we don't tolerate any, you know, sort of compartmentalization in any way of, you know, gender, sexuality, you know, it's so open. And so it is a really interesting snapshot in time, even though it was a long gestation period. In some ways, you know, you call yourself a philosopher, and you talk about fate and things like that. I kind of look at the scenario and go, it couldn't have been any other way. You know,
Yeah.
even just the timing of when you put the book in John's hand, the stuff that you've gone through, the 20 years of just having a family, and I think it just adds so much more color and nuance than if you would have written it, you know, then and there 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think the timing is crucial to the whole thing. And look, this applies to life. There are right times and wrong times. And one of the things that has meant that I have been able to follow my passions is that I'm a very patient person. I you know, I'm mindful of geographical or geological time. And, you know, we get hung up on tomorrow. It's a whole life, and there are seasons, and this book is so much more poignant published now, despite the fact that it is set in between 1992 and 1993. So it is a capsule, or, you know, a capsule of time. And actually there's another factor to that, which it's worth bringing up. My next several novels are all written pre-digital. This is very much on purpose. We're losing something by constantly going to our phones and living in a digital world. I love what it can do, but it doesn't stop me from slowing down and doing things slowly and appreciating things and going deep on things and being patient. So yeah, the temporal aspects of this, I think, are very important. And actually another thing, which is a lot of people I think will find interesting, is I published and polished this novel so many times, but I didn't finish it until 25 years later. I could have fixed me, you know, I could have fixed the Daniel character. And a few people have asked me why I didn't, because he's kind of annoying to start with, so naive. But this is the point where time is important, and it affects things in such a big way. So we've got to be really mindful of that context. So I'm very proud to have you know, captured that. And I'm affected by how different things are from then. I'm encouraged, but I'm also very mindful in terms of sexuality, that if you look around the world and look at how many countries where homosexuality is still illegal, we have such a long way to go.
We do. And I mean, Simon, you're sort of chipping away at things in different places. I mean, the Julian Calendar is a book that's amazing, and it's well worth reading. And you'll share with us where you can get a copy. I want to sort of talk a little bit about the actual publication process, and you know, to sort of kick that section off, in the article in Capital Magazine, you mentioned that New Zealand fiction is on life support, and I thought, well, I have to ask you about that. Maybe you could share with us as you put it in that sort of bigger publishing context.
Okay, so this relates to timing as well, and place. If I lived in London or in New York, my options as a novelist would be completely different. I could, like cricketers or musicians or business people, I could make a living, and I could do it on a global scale. And, you know, a deal in London, just with the UK and then maybe a few other countries, could create enough sales, even with a relatively small royalty figure, to be able to make a living from writing. But I don't live in those places. I live in New Zealand. And unfortunately, by accident of geography, our market is so tiny that when we write, and our whole system is configured around what we call New Zealand fiction, nothing flows. It doesn't work, because we don't talk about New Zealand cricket. A kid doesn't want to grow up to be a New Zealand cricketer. They want to be a cricketer who, if they're really good, might end up playing for their country. And a musician just wants to be a great musician. Lorde wasn't trying to be a good New Zealand musician. She just was trying to be the best she can be, and so on. But unfortunately, New Zealand, and I don't think this is the only country in this trap, we've focused on New Zealand fiction as being something different from fiction. And I just don't think that's the truth. A story is a story. They're universal stories. That's why I can go to a bookstore and pick up a book written by anyone from anywhere and be totally engaged. What we have in New Zealand is we've grown this habit, which I suspect grew out of an idea of trying to support literary fiction, which is by definition unpopular. And I only say that because those folk who talk about literary fiction say that everything else is popular fiction. So, the reverse.
It's true.
It is true, yeah. So we have these New Zealand fiction sections in many of our bookstores, the majority. And unfortunately, what they have in them is only literary fiction. And that, to use an analogy with wine, that would be like only having Riesling, and calling it New Zealand wine, where our most popular wine is Sauvignon Blanc, and the most popular form of fiction is romance. And we have fantastic romance writers, and they're not on our shelves. They're mainly published digitally, and we have some of the best in the world who certainly do make a living. But those who sell fiction in physical book form in New Zealand, I can tell you how many of them are professional in the sense that they make a living from it, and the answer is zero. Absolutely categorically a zero. So we have a big issue, and I'm sure, as I said, some other countries are in this boat, and this will be mainly English-speaking countries that are not the States or the UK. Every country that falls into that category will have some issues in this space, where by trying to promote your local fiction, what you're doing is actually separating it from the commercial world that they should be competing with. So I am not a fan of the New Zealand fiction section or of the idea of New Zealand fiction. I think we should just try to be the best that we can be, try to do our commercial deals on a global scale, and to sell our books as novels competing against all of the other novels in the world. And yeah, when they're good enough, and that's the only kind of novels that I'm trying to write, ones that are world class, then our voices will be heard, and they'll be heard all around the world. So our New Zealand fiction that we see in our bookstores are only really sold here. Very few of them are ever sold overseas, and usually when that happens, it's because they won an overseas literary prize, which is the wrong reason for someone to pick up a book just because it's won a prize, not because people have been talking about it and it's emerged as a great story. So it's a big issue, and I didn't publish with anybody else. I've set up my own publishing imprint, and you've used the term, Jordan, self-publishing, which in effect is what it is, but I like to use terms either independent publishing or boutique publishing, because I have the option to publish with Victoria University Press, where I teach, and so on, or with Penguin Random House New Zealand, which is a publisher that is here, but they're only a local publisher. But I wouldn't go near that, because that would mean I've lost my rights, and I'm holding on to my rights so I can do a big deal overseas. What I'm doing, as you've worked out, is causing a bit of a stir here. So I'm writing about it. I'm writing an article at the moment for a national magazine about exactly what I've just discussed. And I'm on a mission to break through this and to try to get us all talking about it here. So our novelists can be like our musicians and our cricketers and everybody else who's competing on that world stage. And yeah, we can break through. So watch this space.
That's fantastic, Simon. You're certainly not shying away from any of the tough stuff, which is one of the reasons why I really respect and rate what you do and what you say and write. For me, I'm already sold. You've already sold me, but what about others that are in this space? Everyone sort of fancies themselves a little bit of a writer. We've all got a book in us. What advice would you give, given that you've just described this landscape of New Zealand publishing? And I agree. I think it's a really it's like a micro economy that we've created. And my mind flashes to back in Canada when they had the grain subsidies to try and go against the flows of what was economically sustainable to transfer wheat. And it's the country still, sort of 100+ years later, is still lurching along by these, what seemed what was a good idea to protect. But we are very much in a global economy now. So what would your advice be to budding writers, not just in New Zealand, but also if they were overseas? What you would say?
Okay, I've got some clear advice. The main thing is that quality trumps all. So if you write really well, it doesn't matter where you are, you will get through. And this book was not good enough when I first drafted it, and I worked on it and worked on it, worked on it. It was a complicated book because I had to balance those two voices. I'll never write anything else like it. The rest of my novels are all plot driven, filmic kind of novels. They're all different in a way, but they follow a much easier path. This one, it was very technical, and it doesn't come across like that when you read it, which is because I've done all that work in the background. But the book has opened doors. The cover of the book has opened doors. Everything about it has opened doors because it's just good quality. So that's my number one piece of advice. If you want to be successful, just work really hard to be a good writer. And that means you need to understand the basics of story. You need to have all of the writing skills, the grammar and punctuation, all of that, of course. And then if you're going to do your own publishing, you've got to remember, you've got to take on all those roles of editing, of the interior design, then cover design and all of that. And it's got to be as good as the best in that genre anywhere in the world. And if it is, you'll find a pathway through. I've been a little bit surprised at how, not easy, but how fluid it has been here, just turning up out of the blue with this book, and all the doors have been thrust open. And it's because the book has done the talking. The booksellers just look at it and go, yep, that looks like a global best-selling kind of book. And then if they read it or they read a review, they realize that yes, that what's inside matches that, and it just works. So yeah, it's not really a mystery. But in all of that, if you then do a bad publishing deal, it's not going to work, because you're going to end up getting a tiny amount of a tiny amount. So here in New Zealand, the trap, and obviously in any other country where you're not, or really anywhere that isn't the US or the UK, if you do a small local deal and they then sell rights onwards, you are already getting a small amount in your local market. You're going to get even less for those other markets. So you really want your first deal to be in the big markets of the States or the UK. And so that's why I published here, so that I can be what's called the originating publisher. If I publish overseas, I get a much bigger chunk, which gives me the opportunity to make a real living out of it. So get the quality right, get the deal right, and be mindful that there are so many players involved for success to occur. And if you are doing it by yourself, you're going to have to hire people, or you're going to have to do what I've done, because I'm wearing author hat, publisher hat, publicist hat, and in this country, distributor hat as well. And that all takes time. My next novel is delayed because I've got to do all of those things. But once they're set up, that's I don't have to redo that. But it's all hard work, and if you don't have the skills for it, you need to hire someone else to do those things. And that's why it's very attractive to do the deal with the big publisher, but then you get the smaller amount. So you've got to weigh all of these things up.
So not only do you have to have a great idea or a great, storyline, you have to be a pretty damn good writer. You have to produce a high quality product. You have to figure out what you're going to do in the whole publishing space. And yes, publicity, huge, if people don't know about it, I think it was Kiyosaki was interviewed by somebody in New York and was talking about her writing. And she was saying, well, why hasn't anyone picked up my book? It's not, it's such a great quality. And he said, look, I read through it yesterday. It's a fantastic book. He says, what do you know about marketing? And she says, oh, I'm a writer. I write good quality. This is a great story. I shouldn't have to market it at all. And he said, well, they're not called, you know, New York bestsellers, they're best writer, they're called New York bestsellers.
Yeah.
So there is that marketing dimension. And you must be coming across some of that with your wearing yet another hat, the distribution with
Yeah.
Naked Eyes.
Yeah.
So maybe just walk us through a little bit about another box that you're sort of thinking outside of with the distribution of Naked Eyes.
Yeah, sure. Look, this is all interconnected because if you really follow your passion, and writing fiction is one of the hardest things I believe there is to do, to long form fiction novels. So whatever your passion, and I kind of hope that people have other passions, because this one's a really tricky one, but whatever it is, if there is a part of that process that just makes you feel icky, then that's not a good thing. So many years ago, I published a non-fiction book called Endangered, well, actually the US version of Endangered Words, originally from After Zemblanity. And I went through the traditional path, and I was prepared to risk that manuscript on that because it wasn't fiction. It didn't mean as much to me. So I thought I need to try this process out. And in doing so, I learned the hard way that a bad commercial deal, is sort of, it stops there. I'm pulling that back. I have the rights back, and I'll sort that out. But that taught me a lot about this overall process. And that book, and also I've written a writing guide book and a love and a relationship book. The dealings with those three books, working with booksellers and publishers and media and publicists and so on, taught me that whenever there was a part of the process that just felt wrong, it just took all of the gloss away. So in waiting all this time to do my first love, fiction, to finally get that in play, I didn't want there to be any part of it where I just thought, oh, this is awful. And distribution was one of those. It was going to cost me more to distribute each copy than it would to print each copy. This is just to send a book across to a book shop in the same city that I live in. It just didn't feel right. So I thought, okay, I didn't want to do distribution, but actually I'm just going to do it. It's not a big deal. I've been around as an entrepreneur for a long time, and so I wouldn't do it elsewhere. But in New Zealand, I have the networks. It's not a biggie, and I'm really glad that I've done that because it has put me on a pathway with the book industry here, with booksellers, with the book council, with the other people who are part of this industry that I need to work with to be successful here. And if I'm successful here, that's a great platform for being successful elsewhere. It's a kind of proof of concept. And yeah, it has been a lovely thing. It wouldn't have been like that 10 years ago. I don't think the world was ready for it then, but now it's no problem. My calling card with Naked Eyes distribution is quality. So my book fits that, or everything that I do fits that. And so the books that I'm interested in distributing, and once you've got the infrastructure there, why not take along some others with you? So if there are other books out there that are by publisher authors, then I'm interested in them because if they're high quality, because the quality speaks for itself. So it's a slow path. I'm going to have to take, the time to get to the levels where I can get national chains involved. They know about my book, but my count is too small so far. But it will grow. It's inevitable. It will grow in time, and I'll break through on that front. But for all of the independents, it's no problem at all. The doors are wide open, and anything with great quality and publicity. So that means it's very difficult to sell a book after it's been initially promoted. You've got to get the book when it's being promoted, and then back catalog. So previous books can be introduced via the book that's being promoted. But as you said, Jordan, without marketing, no one knows the book exists. They're not going to go into a bookstore and ask for it. So you've got to have that. And I'll be promoting the Julian Calendar here in New Zealand for the whole year. And that's just what it takes to sell books. So it's been interesting, and the book selling industry here is very interested in what I'm doing because my message of quality is the message that they've been trying to share with self-publishers who have 3 or 4 of the parts of the equation right, but not some of the others. And in an instant, they can tell when a book doesn't look quite right. Everything has to be right. So it's bloody hard work, but there is a pathway now, and others will break through. And yeah, it's
So
all good.
are you willing to, if there are people out there that feel that they've got that quality product, should they get in touch with you? Are you actively seeking people to, you know, in that distribution for Naked Eyes?
Yeah, but I'm only doing New Zealand. So they would need to be in New Zealand, and I would encourage them to just put Naked Eyes distribution into Google. They'll find the page, and then there's a document, a 2-pager to download that just says what the standard is and how it all works. And if they still think that they qualify, then yeah, get in touch with me.
That's fantastic. That's good. Another tip that you've shared, which is fantastic. So you've got a million and one things on. You're continuing to work on things. What projects are you working on now, and how on earth do you stay focused and energized? We want to know how you play the ever ready bunny that you do.
Okay. I will start with the secret to staying focused, and that is that, look, it's all the same thing. It's fiction, non-fiction, teaching, they're all just ways of trying to live life as well as I can and help others to live lives as well as they can. It's all about wisdom and learning from what's around us, slowing down, thinking more, doing less, but doing what matters. So I've been interested in that my whole life, and I really feel that every project has that at its heart. And, you know, in a way, storytelling is about cautionary tales. You write about characters who have the best of intentions and then stuff things up royally, and then how they resolve and redeem themselves. So all of my novels have a similar theme of love, loss, resolve, redemption. Of you know, that plot where someone has to pick themselves back up after having you know, put it out there, but it not working out, because that's what happens. We try things, they don't work out, we have to get back up. So the projects that I'm working on in the fiction space, the follow-up to the Julian Calendar is called Par Avion, and it is the first of a trilogy of novels. And look, it sounds like I somehow can be writing all day and night and so on. I've been working on these stories since before I even started writing the Julian Calendar. I had a whole bunch of novels in my head as a 20-year-old, and they've just been percolating over the years, and they've been written out at various stages. So I'm picking up on stories that I know really well. They're like films in my mind, so it's very easy to write them down. So the next 3 have a theme of love letters, and there's a love letter theme in the Julian Calendar. So that's sort of the link between the books. And then these 3 are purposefully, because marketing is important, so they're purposefully set in the UK, then Paris or France, and then the United States, because that's 3 markets: the Britain, Europe, and the United States. So for a publisher, you know, when they see, oh, these books send these boundaries, that's a good thing. So that was all planned. And they are all about love, loss, resolve, redemption. The first one is set in the UK about a postman who has to find his courage. The second one is called Postcards from Paris, and that's set in about 1980s, or the first one's late 70s. The second one's 1980s Paris, but also a century earlier, and it's about a young man who has followed his passion in fine arts. He's a photographer, but a century earlier, a relative of his had to let go of their family's fortune, basically, to follow his interest in the arts in Paris, which they were an industrialist family. And you can imagine going to Paris with the Impressionists didn't go down well with his family, and he walked away from that. So this character's got to try to pick up the clues. There were some postcards, and try to track down what happened to this man. So that's a beautiful story of following a path and trying to discover what happened in his history. And obviously my young photographer will learn a few things on the way. And then the third book is called New York Letters, and it is my homage to the greatest movie of all time, The Shawshank Redemption, where a man gets knocked down so many times and somehow finds a way to get up again. And this is about a stockbroker, not the person you think you should get behind, who really should have been an English teacher. But things happened. His life got knocked about. And, he goes through some terrible things, but finds a way to love again. So those are that three. And then there's a series of 6 adventure stories that follow after that, which I won't tell you about because, I don't want to give the game away. On the non-fiction side of things, my next project is I wrote a writing guidebook, which is how I ended up teaching at the university. And actually sold a lot of those. I've sold out. So I need to write a second edition, and that's a good problem to have. So that's the other main thing for this year. Finished the Part Avion and the second edition of my writing guidebook.
Fantastic. You're embodying the whole authentic living, Simon. It's very, very clear that you're living your passion, and sharing some of the tips that you have already, I know will be useful for people who are looking at writing, or even just looking for their next great love story to read. I guess as we're coming closer to the end, I wonder if there's any last advice or a strategy you might share for others that are really trying to live authentically. And I think one of the things people struggle with sometimes is that they know what they're doing isn't necessarily fitting, but it's really quite hard to follow their dreams or follow their passions, or just to be a little bit happier. Is there anything that you can sort of impart some wisdom as we sort of come closer to the end here?
Sure, yeah, that's a really good question. The pursuit of happiness is a really interesting topic, and as a philosopher, the logic of happiness is it's all about the gap between what you expect and what you experience. So as a philosopher, I know that happiness is within my own orbit to control. I can choose to be unhappy by having unrealistic expectations, and I can choose happiness by having realistic expectations and then reflecting on my good fortune of living at this particular time in history where things are pretty good. We've got a lot of things to work on, but we're very, very fortunate. So firstly, I would advise anyone listening to think about the mechanics of happiness, and what makes you unhappy. It's usually when you expect something that was unreasonable in the first place. So that's part one. And part two, in following your dreams, step back. You can follow that dream as the central core of things, and around it, life's going to be really messy, and there are going to be times, it might be a hiatus of several years or a decade where you have to go off. If you know that you're still moving forward on the things that really matter, then it's all fine. Don't be distracted by the day-to-day. It's the long themes. If you think of the love that you want in your life, those are affairs and relationships that will last as long as possible. So why shouldn't these other things that you care about, these non-relationship passions, also be a long-term thing? And then I think, it's doable. It's messy. I think that's a key part of where we go awry in life these days, is we expect things to all be smooth. It's not possible. Life is flux. No matter what you have, something will come along and a condition will change, and it'll throw you off. The more you care about things, obviously, the higher you are, the further it is to fall. But who wants to anesthetize themselves? So you've got to play a risky game. Love big, love courageously, and then you'll be upset. But that's, I think, preferable to just not caring. So there's no way of getting this all easy and smooth and consistent. It's going to be bumpy, and the big term contentment is what you're after. That you're at peace with yourself, at peace with your path, knowing that you've learned from things that didn't work out, and aiming for momentary happiness, not a good strategy, I don't think. It's a much deeper, longer game.
I think what you're saying really resonates, and it isn't a race, and I'm not sure where we got the notion that it was going to be a race, but it's savoring that, whether it's a mouthful of wine or a good book or that elusive goal that you eventually get to, even some 25 years later with the Julian calendar. Now, Simon, it's been great for you sharing a little bit of your life story, a little bit of the backstory to the Julian calendar. If people want to get a copy of the book, what's the easiest way to do that for you, whether they're in New Zealand or overseas?
Or elsewhere. Okay, well, we'll just stick with the Julian calendar. There's a website, William Henry Books. Oh, and I should explain to people why the novel
Yes.
William Henry, not Simon Hertnon.
Yes.
And it's pretty easy to explain. When we drafted the first copy of the book, it was Simon Hertnon and John Garman's Way. And many years later, we decided it was never going to work with the two names. We'd just have my name. And by then, I'd edited it 10 times, and John was more than happy for it just to be under my name. But I was never comfortable with that. And so I wanted to have both our names, and William is my middle name and Henry is John's middle name. So you can see how I've managed to get both our names on the cover. But I'm actually going to adopt that name from here on in for all my fiction writing. And from a marketing perspective, I think it's very helpful to have a fiction persona as well as a non-fiction one. So that's all good. So WilliamHenryBooks.com is a place. It's just a web page at the moment, part of my simonhertnon.com website. But everything you need to know about finding the book is there. In a nutshell, if you're in New Zealand, please just go to a bookstore or go to your library and borrow it from the library. And if you're in Australia, I'd prefer that you held on. If you want a physical copy, hold on, because it won't be too long before we've got the book on sale there, whether it's Marsilio Press, my imprint, or another imprint that's publishing it. But for the rest of the world, there is a digital book, though again, I would, for this one, be patient. Wait for the physical book. This book is one of those ones that, because it's written in two voices, the typography, which is in different fonts, the design of the book is part of the experience. So look, if you love reading things on your Kindle, go for it. It's on Amazon. But if you want the full experience, I would encourage you to wait. And yeah, that's all you really need to know.
And Simon, you're graciously offering our listeners $5 off if they are going to the Naked Eyes site for the.
Yeah, sure. So there's a link on that page to the Naked Eyes shop, and if you buy anything on that shop, and look, we only supply in New Zealand and Australia, but if you buy anything in that shop, you just put the word authentic in lowercase as a coupon, and you'll get $5 off.
Oh, brilliant. That's a very lovely treat, and it might just be just cover some of the shipping. So it's probably well worth it. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us on the Authentic Living and Loving channel. And I've just been delighted. I've had many conversations with you, Simon, but they're always interesting and new things that I learn about you, and I'm still very, very impressed. If you have a story that you would like to share that you feel will inspire others, we'd love to hear from you. And until we meet again, I'm Dr. Jordan Alexander, encouraging you to join the UBU revolution, and let's all live a life we don't need a vacation from. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Jordan.
See you later.